Now, Roger, 1994 was a very good year for movie fans. We went to see Stargate, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Wyatt Earp, Legends of the Fall, Shawshank Redemption, Speed featured in this show, Forrest Gump, The Crow, Time Cop, so many others, including Interview with the Vampire. Let's watch the trailer again.
Well, what do you say we get started? So you want me to tell you the story of my life? I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you all of it. Gee, how? I'm flesh and blood, but not human. I haven't been human for 200 years.
From the novel by Anne Rice. From Neil Jordan, the director of The Crying Game.
I've come to answer your prayers. Life has no meaning anymore, does it?
His name is Lestat.
But what if I could give it back to you? Pluck out the pain and give you another life. One you could never imagine. I can see you lying on a bed of satin.
He chose one man. He gave him infinite power. Eternal life. And a daughter who would be forever young.
This is the only real evil left.
And then he took the light of day.
You're a vampire who never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over your lips. I can't stand this any longer.
You made us what we are, didn't you?
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we. Do you like dying? You condemn me to hell! Monster. One happy family.
Hate her, Louis! End her suffering and yours! For do not doubt, you are a killer!
I want some more.
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Stephen Ray, Antonio Banderas, Kirsten Dunst, and Christian Slater. Interview with the Vampire.
Wow, Roger, thank you so much for suggesting this film for film marketing.
Oh, do you know what, Pascal? I was looking through Amazon Prime the other day for a film to watch and hadn't intended to. I wasn't even looking for a horror film at the time, and for some reason it just popped up as a suggestion. And I thought, oh, look, Interview with a Vampire. Remember that being a good film. So we watched it, and wow, memory lane. It is such a good film. Gothic horror at its best. I just love the sort of historical setting, New Orleans and Paris as the main feature. Really quite bloodthirsty film. There's a lot of blood and a lot of gore and a lot of really quite nasty violence in this. And I guess it was probably a resetting of vampire lore, wasn't it? Really until Interview of a Vampire, it had always been Count Dracula, whether it was the Christopher Lee version of the 60s or it was the sort of the more up to date. Can't remember the name of the person who did the vampire reboot of the 90s, but this changed everything when it came to vampires, and I guess it redefined vampires until the Twilight series came along a decade or so later, and True Blood, the TV series, redefined vampires. But for a while, this was it.
I think for me what is interesting is, so we had The Lost Boys, 1987, and then nothing else I would argue. Maybe Near Dark is in there as well. And then there's a big gap. So with The Lost Boys, being a vampire, the message was, it's cool. I think you and I agree that we wanted to be vampires but when watching The Lost Boys. But then when you watch an Interview with a Vampire, you go, no, I don't want to, because being a vampire is so tragic. And that's why it really was lovely. So thanks to you, I found the movie on Amazon Prime and watched it again last night. And because I used to own the video on VHS cassette, which tells you how long ago that was, I remember it very, very well. But watching it all those years later, with me at a different age, I got the sense of this is a horrible movie to watch because Lestat is a horrible, horrible person. He's selfish, he's manipulative, he's vindictive, he is very violent, he's very sadistic. Humans to him are just food and cattle. And obviously you've got the opposite with the character of Louis. And I thought that this was one of the most emotionally charged vampire movies I've seen, because then years later we have Blade in 98, which again has been reviewed in Two Geeks Marketing podcast, which takes the vampire genre in a different stratosphere altogether. And like you, I loved the fact that it was taking place in the 18th and 19th century, because then you could have, which they did do, amazing art direction. You could have costumes and so on and so forth. But also, I was very surprised the special effects have not aged one bit.
No, they were remarkable. And the makeup effects of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, the sort of the pale skin where you can see the veins through the skin, remarkably good makeup. And the gore fact, I mean, there's one bit where Louis chops another vampire in half with a scythe or something, and splat down to the ground. That's really quite, it felt a little bit Walking Dead, 20 years before Walking Dead type of special effects there. Incredible. But yeah, there's a massive amount of melancholy, and you can see that, Brad Pitt realizes how miserable being a vampire is and doesn't want to become the evil person that Lestat is. There's a massive emotional tug there.
Well, it's interesting. My memory of watching it when I was much younger, 94, is literally a different century. I really enjoy the dark humour. At this moment when Lestat is reprimanding, obviously, Claudia because she killed the, I think, either the piano teacher and stuff like that. And then you laugh. But then watching it now, I'm thinking, this is terrible. This is, and I don't know, I think it's a movie that therefore can be enjoyed for more different reasons. But as you hinted during the introduction of this episode, it had a very tumultuous, to use that term again, marketing campaign, didn't it?
Well, when we were doing the research for this, Pascal, I actually initially couldn't find anything about the marketing, the actual marketing campaign by the studio, other than, as you would expect, the posters and the trailer. I do actually like the strapline for the film, "Drink from me and live forever," which I thought was good. And again, that hides that undercurrent of the fact that living forever as a vampire in this context isn't actually a very pleasant prospect. But I think the marketing for this film actually ended up revolving around a great big spat, oblique argument between the writer of the original novel upon which the film was based, Anne Rice, and the studio. Because basically, she wrote the screenplay for the film as well as writing the original source novel, but she objected massively to the casting of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt in this film. But particularly, she was almost insane with anger about Tom Cruise being cast in this role, thought that it was the worst casting choice, thought that they would pander to his youth, thought that they would dumb it down because he had this clean-cut sort of American boy image. And she really just went up against the studio and created this furore in the run-up to the launch of the film. And of course, what it inadvertently did was it focused people's attention on the film. And arguably, if she hadn't had such a problem with the casting, the film might not have been as successful because of it. She drew so much attention to her dislike of the people that they'd cast in the film.
People are suggesting this was a tactic by the studios, and I can assure you, judging by the tone and the content of what she complained about, it couldn't have been, because it was just too vitriolic.
Yeah.
For me, I became aware of that tension. I also became aware that Geffen Pictures, the producers, actually took her on and said, "You're wrong."
Yeah.
And for me, it was also, is it possible that there's been just a breakdown in communication? Maybe she doesn't understand how films are being made. And with respect, actors will act. They're given a character, they can do a good job. I'm also thinking, well, did she not know about Stephen Frears? Did she not know about the likes of Neil Jordan? Did she not look at Antonio Banderas, Christian Slater? Did she not know about their work? I mean, Neil Jordan had discovered, like many others, with a Company of Wolves in the early 80s. He did Mona Lisa, which is just outstanding. A Crying Game 2 years prior. So I'm wondering whether she just didn't understand the world of cinema necessarily. It's understandable that she should be very protective of her work. I mean, The Vampire Chronicles, this was written in 76, if memory serves. And that would just... And I was also thinking, Roger, if you are the people making the film, that can't be nice. I mean, I know you could say, well, I'm sure Tom Cruise can just, ride it because he's going to be paid a fortune. But when you're there, he did confess, when you're suspended on your feet for an entire morning with those very old-fashioned kind of... eye lenses, you've got makeup and so on, and behind there's a murmur of Anne Rice and happy with you. It can't be a very, very nice thing, but there is a good conclusion to all this, isn't there?
Yeah, and just before I tell you what the conclusion is, I will agree with you. She was saying that that the casting was like putting Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer in the roles of the vampires, and we're looking back, 30 odd years here, and we obviously think of Tom Cruise as he is today, an actor that's been around for ages, a middle-aged man. But back then, he was relatively early in his film career, wasn't it? I'm trying to think when Risky Business came out. That must have been about 86, 87. So he's only within the first decade. So I imagine he probably did get right inside his, inside his ego and inside his heart, some of the horrible things that this woman was saying. But, as you say, the conclusion was that when she saw the film, she absolutely loved it. And moreover, she absolutely loved Tom Cruise's performance and Brad Pitt's performance, and she was so sort of racked with guilt, I guess, that she even took out adverts in newspapers herself to effectively apologise publicly for the row she'd caused, which again gave the film another boost. And in fact, you can find on YouTube a clip from around the time, and it's pretty ropey quality, to be perfectly honest. It must have been shot on a very low resolution camera. But again, she's saying, I was wrong, and this film is great, and the performances are great, and you've already said that Lestat's character is a nasty, horrible, evil person, but my goodness, Tom Cruise acted his socks off to create that evil character. And I'm glad that in the end she saw that what they have actually put together was pretty impressive.
And that's very much to her credit, and
yeah.
That to me is what's important. So then certainly really is breathing better. By the way, her supporters, the readers of the book, were prepared to just literally not go to the movies in support of her cause. So then they were turned around. And as you mentioned, we had some very, very striking poster art. I used to love just looking at the front cover of that VHS cassette with the menacing look of Lestat and looking into Louis and Claudia. For me, it's back to, this is 1994. It's hard to remember what life was like in 1994, but what I can tell you, Roger, and to our viewers and listeners, the internet, which is where I sometimes focus on, was very different. So what you had was Yahoo. Oh yes, Yahoo was the number one destination for film news, snippets, and reviews from critics, and IMDb was merely 3 to 4 years old, so it was more like a very posh Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
So what we had in terms of the internet was blogs, both personal moviegoers, but also celebrities like Roger Ebert, and you had, of course, the extensive coverage in print media. And what was very telling about this movie, back to your point earlier about the the costumes, the era, the fact that with their long hair they look like rock stars, frankly, all of them.
Yeah.
not only did movie magazines cover it, but also I would call them lifestyle magazine like New York Times, the Rolling Stone, Esquire, Vanity Fair had an interview with Tom Cruise. Of course, Fangoria that we mentioned a few times, they would cover it. And then what they did was, well, they had obviously the print version. In 1994, all they did was to put the words onto a web page. So in 1994, film fans would have to read a text-only web page, which is unthinkable, of course, nowadays, because we didn't have the connectivity to even look at a picture or a video. In the UK, I remember I used to get Flicks magazines. They were in OK magazine, which I did not read, in case people are wondering. But certainly I used to buy Empire magazine and Total Film all the time, and they were covered in there. But the one unintended also form of PR was during the LA screenings, Los Angeles screening. 1994, the audience were not used to such direct violence. I mean, if you've not seen the film, apologies, it's going to be a spoiler. But when Claudia tries to kill Lestat, it's what a scene. I mean, it's so violent, and back to the special effects and so on. And there is I thought it was a very funny scene, but somebody else disagreed with me. Do you remember the one where Louis refuses to drink blood from humans, so Lestat shows him how to drink from a rat, and he catches a rat and literally bites into the necks and empty the blood of the rat into a glass. Well, Oprah Winfrey disagreed with that scene, and he walked out of the Los Angeles screening, creating more PR coverage, making people thinking, I've got to see this film. It's so bad that Oprah Winfrey walked out.
Indeed, and, again, that's influencer marketing. 30 years ago, isn't it? It's influencer marketing 30 years ago. I'm surprised that they never made a sequel to this. Now, Anne Rice has written many books in the Vampire Chronicles series, and the next book was called The Vampire Lestat. Now, it was going to be a bit more of a history of Lestat rather than Louis. But they never got Tom Cruise back to play Lestat again, which is a real shame. I think there was a sequel in the end of the third book, Queen of the Damned, maybe it was called. And I've never seen it, and I believe it's utter rubbish, so I probably will not watch it. But maybe it's better that this film stands alone on its legacy.
I would agree. In terms of follow-up, only a few months ago, AMC announced that they're getting pretty close to doing a TV series. An adaptation of The Interview with the Vampire, but it would be a TV series. So I'm back to your point. Well, I've seen the film. Again, I love the film. Would I want to see a TV series based on the same story? Possibly. Once again, if they're going to produce it as well as they've done the main feature, that'd be very exciting. But I do think that this is the first time that in film marketing we've had to talk about this conflict and clash between the writer and the producers, to the degree that, I mean, literally, that's all the media and others were talking about.
Yeah, I think so. And in looking back now, in hindsight, it was really interesting, and it probably led to a great deal of the success that the film had. But at the time, I can imagine it must have been quite stressful and frustrating for everybody involved.
Yeah. And I'd like to think that all parties have learned from that, and it may well be that particularly for the filmmakers, they've learned to maybe communicate with the writers better, because I don't think this has been the same experience for J.K. Rowling's with the Harry Potter franchise.
No.
Wow. Well, sadly, Roger Edwards, this is the end of this episode of Two Geeks and Martin podcast. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful co-host and bringing to the table many of the content and tech that can make life easier for all of us. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. It is much appreciated. Please leave comments and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next time, please go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards.